Your child is standing in the doorway, shoes untied, backpack on the floor. Time is running out. You ask calmly. Nothing happens. You ask again. Still nothing. By the third time, your voice changes. Your body tightens. You count. 1, 2, 3. Finally, they move, and in that moment, it feels like success. They listened. But something else just happened. Something far more important than shoes. Because you didn't teach discipline. You taught escalation. You taught your child that instructions are optional until your stress reaches a certain level. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere. Children waiting to be reminded. Children delaying until pressure appears. Children responding not to responsibility, but to adult frustration. This is not defiance. It is training. Stay with me, because once you understand what is actually being trained in these moments, discipline stops feeling like a personality problem. It becomes a systems problem. And systems can be redesigned. Let us start with a distinction that changes everything. Obedience is not discipline. Obedience is external. It exists only while someone is watching. Discipline is internal. It operates even when no one is there. Most Western parenting strategies focus on obedience. Clear instructions, reminders, consequences, rewards. They work, temporarily. But the moment external pressure disappears, behavior collapses. That is not because the child is lazy or unmotivated. It is because self-discipline was never built. Now here is the uncomfortable truth. You cannot build self-discipline by regulating your child for them. In the same way, you cannot build muscle by watching someone else lift weights. The body has to experience the effort. The brain has to practice regulation. This is where Japanese parenting looks radically different. Not harsher, not stricter, more patient. In Japan, children are not constantly instructed. They are immersed in structure. They are trusted with responsibility early. And most importantly, adults practice restraint. They do not rush to correct, remind, or rescue. They wait. This waiting is not neglect. It is design. There is a Japanese concept for this approach. It roughly translates to teaching the body. Not commanding behavior, not enforcing compliance. Teaching regulation through experience. This is discipline as embodiment, not enforcement. Now pause for a moment. Think about how often your child actually practices self-regulation. Not compliance, not reacting to you, but regulating themselves, deciding what to do next, correcting their own mistakes, recovering without intervention. For many children, the answer is rarely, because adults step in too fast. Now let us talk about the brain. Self-discipline lives in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, planning, and emotional regulation. This part of the brain shuts down under stress. Yelling, threats, counting, and pressure all activate the stress response, which means every time you escalate to get compliance, you are turning off the very part of the brain you want to strengthen. The child may comply, but no learning happens. Now consider the opposite, when the adult stays calm. when the environment is predictable, when the child is allowed to notice a problem and solve it. The prefrontal cortex stays online. Learning happens. This is why Japanese classrooms look so different. Teachers speak quietly. They rarely repeat instructions. They do not rush to solve problems for students. They wait. A child forgets a pencil. The teacher notices, says nothing. The child pauses, realizes, finds a solution. The lesson sticks. Not because of punishment, not because of praise, because the child owned it. Now let us talk about routine. Routine is not control. Routine is architecture. When daily sequences repeat, the brain stops expending energy on decision-making. The basal ganglia takes over. Behavior becomes automatic, self-initiated. No reminders required. This is why Japanese children follow routines without being told. Not because they are obedient, because the routine is embedded. Now contrast this with many Western homes. Children receive a stream of instructions. Brush your teeth, get dressed, pack your bag. Each instruction requires effort. Each one invites resistance. The brain stays reactive. Now imagine a different approach. A visible morning routine. Same sequence, same order, every day. No narration. No reminders. The routine becomes the cue. And once behavior is cued, discipline emerges naturally. Now let us talk about responsibility. Not chores as punishment, real contribution. In Japan, children carry their own bags. They clean their classrooms. They serve meals. Not to teach obedience, to teach competence. Competence is the fuel of discipline. When children feel capable and needed, they rise. When they feel managed, they wait. Now let us talk about calm. Because this may be the most overlooked part. Regulation is contagious. Your nervous system sets the tone. When you escalate, your child escalates. When you stay calm, your child borrows that calm. This is not motivational talk. It is neuroscience. Children mirror adult regulation automatically. Now let us talk about waiting. The hardest skill for parents. Watching a child struggle without intervening. This is where discipline is actually built. When you wait, the child's brain searches. When you rescue, the search stops. Search is learning. Rescue is interruption. Now let us bring this together. Discipline is not created through commands. It is cultivated through structure, responsibility, modeling, and restraint. And the restraint part is the hardest, because it requires the adult to regulate themselves first. This is not easy, but it is effective. And this is only the foundation. Because once self-discipline begins to form, everything else changes. Once you see the difference between obedience and self-discipline, it becomes impossible to ignore how often adults accidentally weaken the very skill they want to build. Reminders feel helpful. Corrections feel responsible. Intervention feels necessary. But each one removes a small opportunity for the child's brain to engage in self-regulation. And self-regulation, like any skill, weakens without use. Now let us talk about reminders, because this is where most families get stuck. A reminder seems harmless.
Don't forget your jacket. Did you pack your lunch? Clean up your toys. But reminders outsource awareness. They teach the brain that noticing is someone else's job. Over time, the child stops scanning the environment. They wait. Waiting becomes adaptive, and initiative fades. This is why children who are constantly reminded struggle later with self-starting, not because they are lazy, because the system trained them not to initiate.
Now let us talk about the Japanese alternative. Adults say less. They show more. They design environments that cue behavior without words. Shoes are placed near the door. Backpacks have a specific location. Supplies are organized visually. The environment becomes the reminder. This reduces friction, and friction is the enemy of self-discipline. Now let us talk about friction more deeply. Friction is any barrier between intention and action. The more friction, the more willpower is required. Willpower is limited. Systems conserve willpower. This is why Japanese homes and schools emphasize order, not for aesthetics, for behavior. When behavior is easy to initiate, discipline emerges naturally. Now let us talk about consequences, not punishment. Consequences. In Japanese parenting, consequences are usually natural and immediate. A child forgets homework. They experience discomfort at school. No lecture at home. The lesson belongs to the child. This ownership is critical. When parents add emotional reactions, the lesson shifts. The child focuses on the parent's emotion, not their own behavior. This is why calm responses teach more than intense ones. Now let us talk about timing. Timing determines whether the brain learns or defends. When a child is emotionally escalated, the brain cannot integrate feedback, so lectures fail. Japanese adults often wait until the child is calm, sometimes much later, sometimes not at all. Because not every mistake needs commentary. Silence is a teacher. Now let us talk about shame. Shame shuts down learning. Japanese discipline avoids shaming. Mistakes are treated as part of learning, not as character flaws. This preserves dignity. Dignity supports regulation. Now let us talk about effort. In Japan, effort is praised more than outcome. You tried. You stayed focused. You fixed it. This reinforces persistence. Persistence is the engine of discipline. Now let us talk about repetition. Self-discipline is not taught once. It is built through repetition. Same routines, same expectations, same calm responses. Children adapt to what is consistent. They test what is inconsistent. Now let us talk about the parent's role again. The parent's primary job is not to control behavior. It is to protect the system. Protect routines. Protect structure. Protect calm. When the system holds, behavior improves. When the system breaks, behavior collapses. Now let us talk about escalation. Escalation feels powerful. It produces immediate compliance, but it teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches that calm instructions are optional. Only emotion matters. This trains children to ignore calm cues and wait for intensity. Japanese discipline avoids escalation deliberately. Adults keep tone flat, consistent, predictable.
This predictability builds trust. Trust builds cooperation. Now let us talk about cooperation. Cooperation is not submission, it is alignment. Children cooperate when they understand expectations and feel respected. Structure without respect creates rebellion.
Respect without structure creates chaos. Japanese parenting balances both. Now let us talk about autonomy again. Children are given responsibility early. Not because adults expect perfection, because responsibility builds competence. Competence builds confidence. Confidence supports discipline. This chain cannot be skipped. Now let us zoom out. What Japanese parents are really teaching is not behavior. It is identity. I am someone who notices. I am someone who contributes. I am someone who manages myself. These identities form through experience, not instruction. Now let us talk about the hardest part for Western parents. Doing less, saying less, waiting more. This feels risky because silence feels like failure. But silence is where learning happens. Now let us talk about mistakes again. Children will forget. They will fail. They will struggle. This is not evidence the system is broken. It is evidence the system is working. Because struggle precedes mastery. Now let us bring this back to discipline. Self-discipline is not compliance under pressure. It is regulation under freedom. That freedom is earned through structure, and structure is maintained through adult restraint. Now let us prepare to go deeper, because once self-discipline begins to form, it changes how children relate to authority, effort, and themselves. And that is where the long-term impact becomes visible. When self-discipline begins to take root, the change is subtle at first. There is no dramatic moment, no sudden transformation. Instead, there is a quiet shift. Children stop waiting. They start anticipating. They act before being told. Not because they fear consequences, because the system trained them to notice. This is where Japanese discipline reveals its long-term power. It does not create obedient children. It creates reliable ones. Now let us talk about reliability. Reliability is the foundation of trust. Trust is the foundation of leadership. And leadership begins long before adulthood. Children who learn to manage themselves early are trusted more. They are given more responsibility. They are expected to handle complexity, and expectations shape behavior. Now let us connect self-discipline to confidence. Confidence is not loud. It is not assertive performance. It is quiet competence. The confidence that comes from knowing, I can handle what comes next. This confidence is built through repetition, small moments of self-correction, small recoveries from mistakes, small successes that belong entirely to the child. Now let us talk about adolescence. This is where many parents fear losing control. Teenagers seek autonomy. They push boundaries. They test limits. Parents who rely on control escalate. Parents who rely on structure hold steady. Japanese parenting does not collapse during adolescence. Because discipline was never enforced externally. It was internalized. Teenagers raised with this approach still rebel at times, but their rebellion is contained. They argue less. They recover faster. They do not need constant supervision, because the internal system is already there. Now let us talk about authority again. Authority that was calm and consistent early does not need to become harsh later. Children who trust authority do not need to fight it. They may disagree, but they do not need to dominate. Now let us talk about effort. In Japanese culture, effort is normalized. Struggle is not dramatic. It is expected. This expectation removes shame. When struggle is normal, children persist. When struggle is treated as a problem, children avoid. Avoidance is the enemy of discipline. Now let us talk about school. Children who practiced self-discipline at home adapt better to structured environments. They follow routines. They manage materials. They recover from mistakes without melting down. Teachers notice this. Opportunities follow. Now let us talk about leadership. Leadership is not about control. It is about self-management. People who cannot manage themselves cannot lead others. Children who learn self-discipline early stand out later, not because they dominate, because they are dependable. Now let us connect this to the mindset of long-term investors. Short-term discomfort, long-term advantage. Self-discipline is compounded advantage. Each small act of regulation builds capacity. Over years, the difference becomes enormous. Now let us talk about the parent again. This approach requires you to let go of the illusion of control. You stop managing behavior moment to moment. You manage the environment. You protect routines. You stay calm. This is harder than it sounds, but it is sustainable. Now let us talk about sustainability. Parenting through control burns parents out. Parenting through systems conserves energy. This is why Japanese parents appear calmer, not because their children are easier, because the system carries the load. Now let us talk about emotional safety. Children raised without constant correction feel safer. Safety allows honesty. Honesty allows growth. Fear shuts everything down. Now let us talk about mistakes again. Mistakes are not interruptions. They are training. Children who are allowed to experience consequences without shame develop resilience. Resilience is the backbone of discipline. Now let us bring this together. Self-discipline creates confidence. Confidence creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. Opportunity shapes identity. And identity drives behavior for life. This is not theory. It is design. Now let us prepare to close this, because the final piece is not about children. It is about how adults redefine success in parenting. At some point, discipline stops being about correction. It becomes about identity, about the kind of person your child believes they are. Because behavior does not live in rules. It lives in self-concept. Children do not ask themselves, "What am I allowed to do?" They ask, often unconsciously, "Who am I in situations like this?" Japanese discipline works because it shapes that answer quietly. I am someone who notices. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who manages myself. Those beliefs do not come from lectures. They come from lived experience. Now let us talk about the parent's transformation, because this approach changes you as much as it changes the child. You stop monitoring every action. You stop repeating yourself. You stop escalating to be heard. Instead, you focus on protecting the system, routines, order, calm. You become less reactive. And less reactive parents lead better. This is not emotional detachment. It is emotional mastery. Now let us talk about control one last time. Control feels powerful, but it is fragile. The moment you are not there, it disappears. Self-discipline is durable. It travels with the child, into school, into friendships, into work, into adulthood. This is the return on investment. Now let us talk about trust again. Trust is not permissiveness. Trust is confidence in a system. Confidence that if the environment is stable, the child will regulate. Hunger regulates appetite. Routine regulates behavior. Responsibility regulates effort. Adults do not need to force outcomes. They need to design conditions. Now let us address the final fear many parents carry. What if I'm not strict enough? Strictness is not the goal. Clarity is. Clarity reduces anxiety. Anxious children test limits. Calm children cooperate. This is not coincidence. It is biology. Now let us talk about the long horizon. Parenting is not about winning today. It is about shaping capacity for decades. The child who learns self-discipline early does not avoid mistakes. They recover from them. Recovery is the real skill. Now let us talk about recovery. Life will challenge your child. Deadlines, conflicts, failure. The question is not whether these will happen. The question is whether your child freezes or adapts. Self-discipline is the difference. Now pause for a moment. If this video has changed how you think about discipline, obedience, or control, subscribe to this channel, not for algorithms, but because these conversations are rare, and they matter. And if there is one person in your life, a partner, a friend, a sibling, someone you genuinely care about and want to build a better relationship with their child, share this video with them. Not to criticize, not to correct, but to support. Because parenting, like leadership, is not meant to be done alone. Now let us bring this home. You are not raising a child who follows orders. You are raising a human who can manage themselves, who can notice what needs to be done, who can act without pressure, who can stay regulated when no one is watching. That is not built through reminders. It is built through structure, through patience, through restraint, through trusting the process. The Japanese approach to discipline is not about being stricter. It is about being wiser. It replaces force with design, noise with calm, obedience with self-control. And once that shift happens, discipline stops being a battle. It becomes a byproduct, a quiet one, but a lasting one. Because self-discipline, once built, does not need to be enforced. It carries itself for a lifetime.